Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Women Plus Water lecture. My name is Andrea Rowe, and I am the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Specialist with the Global Institute for Water Security and Global Water Futures here at the University of Saskatchewan. I'd just like to run through a couple of quick logistics while folks are still joining the webinar. You are able to listen in French by clicking on the globe shape interpretation button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. In addition, you can also access closed captioning by pressing the More button on the toolbar below, and the closed captioning function will appear. This event is approximately 1 hour in length, and participants will remain muted throughout. However, you do have the opportunity to ask our panelists questions by putting them in the Q&A box, and I will moderate those questions in the last 10 minutes of the hour. I want to acknowledge that we are all participating today from the traditional territories of First Peoples across this country. Those of us in Saskatoon are gathering here today on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. The University of Saskatchewan is committed to honoring and supporting the Indigenous peoples, Indigenous cultures, Indigenous values, and Indigenous languages that belong to this land. Water is the lifeblood of people and societies, connecting us, and we pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of the Saskatoon region and reaffirm our relationship with one another and with the lands and waters that are essential to our health and well-being. I invite those of you joining from other territories today to reflect on and recognize the lands and waters you call home and set the intention to have a productive and positive discussion. I would also like to thank our sponsors, Global Water Futures, the Global Water Futures Young Professionals, and the Global Institute for Water Security for committing the resources to make this series a reality. I would like to extend a special welcome to young professionals from the University of Saskatchewan, Laurier, Waterloo, and McMaster, and guests joining today from the University of Zambia, Lund University, and Glasgow Caledonian University. Yesterday, March 22nd, 2023, marked World Water Day, and the call to action put forward by the United Nations is be the change you want to see in the world, recognizing that even small actions can make a difference. The latest data show that governments must work on average 4 times faster to meet the UN SDG 6 goal of clean water and sanitation for all on time. Dysfunction throughout the water cycle is undermining progress on all major global issues, from health to hunger, gender equality to job, education, industry, disaster, and peace. This is why we're here today, to unpack the reality of the climate crisis and understand that it is a water crisis. And without getting water right, we cannot effectively prevent and respond to climate change. I'm pleased to introduce today's expert panel and will provide us with a timely perspective on these important global challenges. I'm going to read their brief biographies now, and I encourage you to check out their full biographies on our website. Our host for today, Dr. Inonge Milupi, is an expert in climate change impact on human health, is an environmental education expert, and has 5 years of expertise in wildlife resource management. She completed her postdoc fellowship at the University of Waterloo in Canada in 2021. Dr. Milupi has a PhD in Environment and Society with a focus on wildlife resources, sustainability at the University of Pretoria in South Africa in 2018. Her areas of technical expertise include climate change and its impacts on water resources, wildlife management, women and environment, as well as local ecological knowledge. Inonge is currently a lecturer at the University of Zambia in the School of Education, offering courses to both undergraduate and postgraduate programs. So welcome, Inonge, and thank you for being our expert host today. Our next guest, Professor Tahseen Jafry. Professor Tahseen Jafry is the director of the Mary Robinson Center for Climate Justice. Her research interests are wide and deep. They include the justice and equity aspects of climate change, gender, and poverty, targeting the management of natural resources, especially water, the geopolitical nature of climate justice, and the psychosocial impact of climate change. As a qualified engineer and social scientist, Professor Jafry is well-versed across disciplines and has over 2 decades of research and development experience in the Global South. Welcome, Professor Jafry. And finally, our last guest is Dr. Angela Dr. Martina Angela Caretta. She is a senior lecturer at the Department of Human Geography at Lund University in Sweden. She holds a PhD in geography from Stockholm University, and she's a feminist geographer with expertise in water, climate change adaptation, gender, and participatory methodology. Dr. Caretta is one of two coordinating lead authors of the water chapter in the IPCC 6 assessment report. She has carried out extensive fieldwork in East Africa, Latin America, and Appalachia in the United States. Her work has been published in Gender, Place, and Culture, the Annals of AAG, Climate and Development, Frontiers, Water, Qualitative Research, and among others. So welcome to our panel, and I will now pass it over to Inonge, and each of our panelists will share a brief presentation about their work before they move into a conversation. We look forward to hearing from you today.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. My name is Inonge Milupi from the University of Zambia, and for sure the climate crisis is a water crisis. So I'm going to share a brief presentation on water and climate change. So primarily water crisis is a water crisis. We feel the impact through the worsening of floods, through the rising of sea levels, the shrinking of ice fields, the coming out of the wildfires. It's becoming very, very common, and also the droughts. So this is all caused by the climate change. So water and climate change are closely linked. The extreme weather events are making water sources very scarce, very unpredictable, and more polluted. Or it's either you have one of these or three of them. So this impacts, they impact throughout the water cycle. And when that happens, they threaten the sustainable development. They also threaten biodiversity. Also, the people access to water is reduced, as well as sanitation. So, still looking at water and climate change, flooding and rising sea levels can contaminate the water sources. For example, with salt water and fecal matter. And when that happens, it causes damage to water and sanitation infrastructure, such as the water points, the wells, and also the wastewater treatment facilities. So, however, water can fight climate change. Here we talk of sustainable water management, which is central to building the resilience of societies and ecosystems to reduce carbon emissions. So therefore, everyone has a role to play. Actions at individual levels and also at household level is very, very vital. Then I come to the impact of water crisis with regard to women and girls. So clean water is very essential and linked to women and girls. It is vital for several activities such as bathing, for drinking, for cooking, breastfeeding, pregnancy, childbirth, and many examples that you can list. So without sustainable access to clean water and proper sanitation, the economic and social progress of women and girls will weaken, leading them to face a variety of health issues, a variety of social issues, nutritional issues, and also economical issues. And this has a repercussion throughout their lives. So girls and women, when the water is scarce, they are the ones that are at the forefront looking for the water, which is not polluted for their families. And where are the men? They are just seated at home waiting for this woman to go and fetch for this water and bring the water. Okay. A case study that was conducted in Zambia, in the western part of Zambia, in the Barose floodplain by Milupi and others, showed that flooding, which is a common feature in the area, affects the local people in many ways, such as submerging the water wells, which is the source of safe water for these people in the area. So this is the area of the flooded floodplain. So when the area is like this, the water bodies, the water sources is also flooded. There's nowhere where you can find clean water. Everything is polluted. So when that happens, people's hardships and suffering due to flooding become more severe in the areas of sanitation. Why? Because their toilets remain unused during the flood. Hence, the people pollute the water bodies by defecating openly in the stream and in the river waters. And because of using this polluted water and living unsanitary conditions, most of the people suffer from waterborne diseases, especially the children under the age of 5 years. From the study also, we discovered that due to this insufficient food, which is caused by these floods, there was also a problem with health problems such as malnutrition. It tends to be more in the children during the floods. Why? Because most of the fields are flooded by water, so the food becomes scarce. The study also showed that the community, this Barose floodplain, they take temporarily short measures regarding the water supply and sanitation. Some of them, they leave the floodplain and come later after the floods are submerged. And therefore, there are no permanent measures to try and resolve these issues. So therefore, at that study, we recommended that there's need for collaboration from all relevant institutions, such as government departments, non-government organizations, to take up the measures that will make sure that there are permanent measures to try and reduce the suffering of the people, not only in the rural areas, but all over in the country, so that the sanitation issues are addressed, the health issues are addressed. So this is what the study found. So what is the way forward with regard to challenges of water, or when water is polluted? So what is the next? So it brings us back to the climate policymakers. Okay, there must be they should have put water at the heart of every action, because water is life. Sustainable water management will help societies also climate change to help us build resilience and protect health and also saving lives. We've seen that there's a lot of illnesses during the floods in the area that I've given example. So it will also help this sustainable water management. It will also help in mitigating climate change itself, thereby protecting ecosystems and reducing carbon emissions from water and sanitation, transportation, and treatment. So we urge now the politicians, there should be cooperation across the national borders to try and balance the water needs of communities, not only communities, but also industries and ecosystems. There's also need for governments to have laws and policies that specifically mentions women participation in rural sanitation and water resources management. Why? Because the woman is affected more when water is polluted. When there's no water, there's drought, this woman will have to travel several kilometers to go and look for clean water for the family. And therefore, involving such people in the making decision process of water management, it will make sure that issues of water affecting women will be addressed, because they are the most that are affected when the water is polluted. I think for now, I can end up here. Thank you for listening.
And now we can just pass this over and ask our next guest, Martina, to share her brief presentation.
Yes. So, and I hope that you see it full screen. You don't. So, let me see. Yeah, is it full screen under? Can you confirm?
Yes, it is now. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, as Andrea said in my presentation, I am one of two coordinating lead authors of the latest chapter on water in the second IPCC, in the second report of the IPCC that came out last year on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. So some of that I will discuss tonight comes from the work that I've done together with other 12 lead scientists, more than 50 contributing authors and 2 review authors spanning across actually all disciplines and regions. We went through 3 rounds of reviews with more than 5,000 comments. So when they say, well, we don't know how the science of the IPCC is done, well, here you have it, and I'll be happy to talk to you tonight about it. A bit more about myself. So my work is at the intersection of water, climate change, and gender, clearly. The reason why I'm here tonight. There are 2, I've done work across the world, and there are 2 things particular that I have looked into. water and gender from the point of view of adaptation. So I did work around smallholder irrigation farming in East Africa and looked at how women and men have differentiated vulnerability and also how they adapted differently to climate change and to water scarcity, particularly induced by climate change. I then have carried out work in North America and in Ecuador, where I'm continuing now my research to look at the other face of climate change solutions, which is mitigation, and now particularly metals and metals that are used for the green transition, particularly in car batteries. You can think about and gas, particularly shale gas, that is presented as a climate-friendly fossil fuel. How the extraction of those is actually affecting water resources, and how women in particular resist these processes of extraction. So again, my work at the intersection of climate change, water and gender, looking both at adaptation in terms of irrigation and mitigation in terms of extraction of metals used for the green transition. I, like it was said before, I identify as a feminist geographer. And I do this work because I think that it is important to continue making visible the experiences and situated knowledges of marginalized groups. Because I think that it is important to push other researchers to ditch extractive research practices. I do only participatory work when I carry out research. It is important also to subvert research dynamics, to work alongside practitioners and citizens, to find transformative solutions to climate change. Much of the work that I carry out is actually with environmental NGOs and citizen groups that really work at the grassroots facing these issues. And then I do this work because I think that it is important to keep on questioning the discourse that women are helpless in the face of climate change. Women are actually the first ones often that realize that water insecurity is actually taking place in their communities, and they are the first ones that, as Inonge said before, that need to take action about it. So my work tries to highlight how the situated lived experience of women is fundamental for us to be successful both in mitigation and in adaptation to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And now we'll pass it over to Professor Tahseen Jafry to share her work.
Thank you, and a very good morning and afternoon and evening to everyone who's joining us. It's a pleasure for me to be on this call. The focus of today is to position and unpack the reality of the climate crisis and the water crisis nexus. So there is no doubt that changes in the climate is impacting access to and availability of water for domestic consumption. Water as a resource is, of course, needed for agriculture, industry, and other activities, but specifically for human survival, human consumption is absolutely paramount. And this leads me specifically to my second point, that a quarter of the world's population are left behind in terms of access to safe drinking water, as published by the WHO report in 2022, citing, I'd like to know, inequality as an issue. So if we're trying to find answers to some of the and solutions to the huge issues, then let me provide some thoughts here. And this is based on research that we have conducted at the Mary Robinson Centre for Climate Justice here at Glasgow Caledonian University. So to my mind, in many countries, especially in the global south, access to drinking water is not really a basic human right. The privatisation of water as a resource is at the heart of the problem, as well as issues around governance and ownership. The ownership of water points at community levels involves politicians, traditional leaders, and communities. And affirming authority over water is where it gets really, really difficult. The governance structures around water are complex, involving a multitude of social actors, public, private, NGOs, faith-based organizations, donors. It is huge and it's complicated. But where it gets really skewed is a lack of community voice in decision-making with reference to water access. And this, together with a lack of adequate funding and the over-reliance, I would say, on donors, leads us to wonder if safe drinking water access is actually considered a national priority for governments or not. Solutions to water access challenges, in my mind, should be part of a broader socioeconomic development model which promotes awareness and rights and responsibilities of citizens. The active participation of social actors in water governance is absolutely fundamental to guarantee water for all. At the end of the day, governments retain sovereignty, their sovereign duty over ensuring the fulfilment of the human rights to safe drinking water. But what is needed is for us to look towards ensuring that these human rights are actually exercised. And I really hope that what comes out of the UN Water Conference is able to articulate some of these issues. Because having worked in this environment for 25 years of my working life, and I've worked in the depths of poverty, and I'm seeing over and over again the same issues multiple times, year in and year out. So what we really need to see is a radical shift and commitment to ensuring that change is progressive and delivered against SDG progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jafry. And now I will hand it over to our host for today, Inonge Milupi. She will lead you in a conversation. Over to you, Inonge.
Thank you very much for those presentations, colleagues. So now we go on into the discussion. A few issues have been arisen, maybe some questions from what we've been presenting, and maybe to go into detail so that we get some understanding of the presentations. We have maybe a few questions that we need to discuss as a panel. So I'll start with the first one. Okay, so when you start with the first one, the first question about climate change. How do human rights impact the right to access to water? So to help me with this discussion, we have two hosts. I'm sure the three presenters, the people that we're presenting are here. So we are going to discuss these issues one by one. So we'll start with the first question. How do human rights impact the right to access to water? And Dr. Martina, maybe you can come in and...
Yeah, I think that Tahseen can speak better to this than I can, given that her points were exactly about this that she was handing our presentation. But what I can say is that in the work that I have done, what I've seen is that women's rights in terms of access to water are limited all across the world where I've done research. And this is not only manifested in the fact that, like you were saying in your presentation, Inonge, that women have to walk farther to get water, or they sometimes take away actually food from their mouth and give it to their kids and their husband. They decided not to wash or bathe because, again, there's a lack of water. But it is also manifested in the fact that they actually do not sit in decision-making forums where decisions are taken around the distribution of water. And this is not just something that we see in the global south, but it is also something that is seen in the global north. When we think about how many water engineers there are in the global north, a lot of them are definitely not women. So decisions that impact the cities and big metropolitan areas in the global north are also not taken by women. And Another element that we can bring in is that women have, like I said, situated lived experience, situated knowledge, lived experience around water insecurity, and it is actually a loss that they are not listened to when decisions around it are taken. And it is left only to the other 50%, which, by the way, is less than 50% to take decisions around this.
Thank you very much. Do you have any comment, Professor? Any comment?
Yeah. Yes, I do. Thank you, Inonge, for the question. I think there's no doubt that the human rights issue is absolutely fundamental here. But I do consider and often wonder why is it that ordinary people on the ground do not have a fundamental right or access to safe drinking water. And the way I look at that is trying to understand what the bottlenecks and challenges are. And quite often it is to do with awareness of. People are often not able to articulate their rights because they're not aware of what the rights are. But it's not just that, it's the fact that those rights are not exercised from a national platform. And so therein lies the challenge, this issue of convergence, because then communities are ever more removed from what they can and cannot have access to and availability of. And when we think about it's not just about women, it's for communities as a whole. So whether you're in cities or urban landscapes or rural landscapes, it's the same landscape for all. But I think it's incumbent on national governments and government priorities to get to make that awareness clear. But I often also wonder whether it's not done because it will open more challenges than it will solve problems, and all of it costs a lot of money. And there isn't the money to go around. And I think we're in this kind of like very strange, convoluted space where national governments are dependent on the resources coming in from multiple donors who have their own agendas. And the whole thing is so complex and it gets so miscued that the actually core business of what we're trying to do is to get water to every citizen is missed. It gets fragmented. So I think it's about stripping back, but also really focusing in on what our key priorities are going forward and making sure we deliver on them nationally and regionally and locally.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the main issue is that the governments are missing it because they are not seriously looking at the main issue that is affecting the people. So as you are mentioning, Professor, it's true that they're missing the issue of key issues that are, but they divest. Maybe the donors can contribute the money, but the money finds its way in other areas, leaving out the key issues for that. So I want to find out, like a panelist, what about the issue of gender and when the indigenous knowledge, how does it influence the ability to access these rights to water, for example? Do they have an impact or not? If we start with gender.
Yeah. If I could just pick that up straight away,
yes.
And gender and indigenous knowledge, I think, when it comes to indigenous knowledge, the power lies that with communities and indigenous people who are so removed sometimes from the reality of what is possible out there. And I think also what we found in our research is that there is a tendency to be somewhat afraid to come forward because there's this kind of like this fear factor of an uncertainty on what how to exercise their rights. And this applies more to women than it does for men, just socially, culturally, how things are just made up. But I think it's our job to support and encourage and enable those voices to be heard and enable those conversations and those discussions to take place. And I think that's what's missing, is we know that the problem's there. The problem has been there for decades. But what is missing right now is enabling that change to take place.
Is it possible we can get a different route? Because there is a lot of research that has been done that has identified women to be underrepresented in the policies of water management. So research is there, plenty of research. So what would be the best route to take to try and find means and ways of bringing on board the women to be part and parcel of decision-making process of water management? Because the research appears to, like you just felt.
Well, I think thank you. If I may jump in, Inonge, I think that, well, it has to do a lot with organization, actually, with being organized and coming together. And I think this can speak also to what Tahseen was saying earlier in terms of people not being aware of having the rights and not knowing how to approach the fact that they have a right. Like, we've seen where women are organized and where indigenous groups are organized and they've reclaimed the right to water and they've taken to the courts, particularly I think about some countries in Latin America, they've actually been successful because they've used the tools of the master basically to show that this is a fundamental right that we've had, and we were the first to be in this land. Hence, these rights should be recognized to us. Water should not be privatized. This is something that we've seen, for instance, in Latin America. I think in my research, what I've seen is that when women are organized in different sorts of groups, whether it is water stewardship groups, support groups, financial groups among themselves, that's when they can actually reclaim a right, and that's when they start to be heard. Like, being a bigger number actually makes a difference. And so that is something that we also see. I mean, when we've done the IPCC work, for instance, there have been more and more voices say we should include indigenous knowledge in the previous assessment report, and we were finally able to do it in this assessment report. So I think things are changing. I think there has been so much research showing that these groups have been marginalized, that finally, potentially, the tide is turning. But I do agree with Tahseen that there is so much more that needs to be done, because we've seen it also in the negotiations that went on until last weekend with the synthesis report of the IPCC. Governments are still trying to make the point that they don't have the money to take care of climate financing, and that's like just ridiculous. Sorry. So yeah.
If I can also compliment Martina what you're saying there, I think getting organized and enabling women to get, indigenous groups to get organized is so important, and also to build on that. Quite often what we hear when it comes to water is the technical solution. So it's around the water pumps, it's about the boreholes, it's about these issues. But we know in some parts and in many examples of the technical innovation being vandalized and destroyed and so on, and overall it makes no sense, but it actually happens, and that's because that quite often technical solutions are planted in places without giving due diligence to where they're being implemented, who's involved, what groups are involved, who is organised around water points and water holes and so on. But I think what happens quite often is that a lot of donors come in and they go down this route of technical fix because it's simple, it seems straightforward. You can put in a borehole, you can put in a pump, and you can take your pictures, and then you can go away again. But what's left behind is the management, the operation, and the implementation, and the sustainability of that technical innovation. And it's just often missing. And so we are left with fragmented issues. Yeah.
So now, given the complexity of water and climate crisis, why do governments continue to look for simpler solutions? Why can't they come up with permanent solutions?
I think that, well, in part, it is what we were saying before with trying to make the message easy to those that are funding those projects. On the other hand, governments, I think, have a limited taste for complex and contextualize the solutions because they're not easy to communicate to the wider public. They're not easy to sell for electoral purposes, for instance. I think that what we've seen with the work of assessment around adaptation solutions that we've done for the IPCC is that the majority of the research is done actually in the global south when it pertains to water. It is done and it pertains mostly when we talk about adaptation to climate change, it pertains mostly irrigation. And irrigation is a solution that has been proclaimed for decades and decades as a way to ensure more crop per drop. But what we've seen is that it has also actually turned into a maladaptive solution in many places where more irrigation has actually meant the expansion of cultivation, maybe also with water-intensive crops, and that's actually been going against what the original point of irrigation was, which was trying to make cultivation more efficient. So going back to your questions, why do governments continue to look for simple solutions? Well, because they're easy to communicate and they're easy to try to convey to the general public, but in reality, in terms of their success, it still remains to be seen whether simple solutions actually work for climate change. What we do know is that adaptation has an end. Like we're going right against it. We're moving towards 1.5, moving towards 2 degrees average temperature increase, and adaptation cannot save us from what's coming. What we need to do is actually mitigation. And there again, governments tend to think of these huge technological solutions, but the truth is that it remains, they need to enable us as individual citizens to be able to make the choices where actually mitigation is going to take place.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So you can see the challenges that is still ahead of us. And I just wanted to get back to Dr. Martina. So what does the IPCC report or tell us about this crisis?
You mean about the solutions?
The solutions to the crisis that we have.
Yeah, one like I was saying, what it tells us is that the research that is there highlights mostly solutions that we've seen applied in agriculture in the global south, but it's still a huge lack of knowledge when it comes, for instance, to urban area, to the global north. But then also what we don't know, okay, is how these adaptation solutions, say irrigation, changing crops, shifting planting patterns, for instance, how are they going to work in a world where we're going to be at 1.52 degrees Celsius? So we basically do not have the knowledge to say, actually, the adaptation solutions that have worked so far are actually going to work in the future. So there is still a pretty substantial knowledge gap that we as scientists have to fill moving forward. Because we risk telling government, okay, this is a solution that has worked so far, but we're actually unable to say, okay, this is actually going to be working in the future.
Thank you. And we have heard from our discussion that there's a lot of research that has been conducted in the same area. So my question is, why do academicians continue to research on the same topics without a measurable change? So what is driving us to continue with the research and yet there are no measurable change?
That's a very good question. Yes, that is a very good question, and it's frustrating question at the same time, because you're so right. You're so right. I think quite often it is, the research is conducted, and I think it's selfish to say that a lot of academics would do it because of publications and career progression and working in academia and so on and so on. But I think to be able to strip away from that, to be able to move forward from that, my hope is that if new research is conducted on the ground, it should be conducted in good coordination with the key social actors in the countries where the research is being conducted. So the key players who are involved, who could maybe direct the research into areas where there remains a knowledge gap. So it needs to be a little bit of a two-way process, because otherwise, if that is not articulated correctly, or if the research is not aligned correctly with national plans and government plans and so on, then it's very hard to know exactly where the knowledge gaps are. And the research is, someone's specific personal interest rather than what is needed for the country to move forward. So there's a number of kind of like different agendas there. But I completely agree with you. Like I said, we've all worked in these areas for a long time, and I find the same conversations over and over again, and I'm desperate to move on to new conversations.
And I think, if I may jump in also, is that the issue is not just that, exactly like Tahseen was saying, that the research is not aligned with what is happening to people on the ground. What we see, and the issue that we've had in scholarly work, is that we do not disseminate back to the actual people that we've done research with. Often we come back to our universities, we publish our research behind a paywall, and even the governments of the countries where we've done the work are actually not aware of the results that we've published. The communities where we carry out the work, they don't know what they taught us, basically. So this is like a huge gap that we need to close, because if what is the goal of research if not to try to advance, try to find potentially solution or advance in the resolution of some issues. But if we don't then feed back those results to the communities where we were studying that issue, how can we expect to actually move forward?
And I think just to if I can just add to that, I think you're right, Martina. It's like, research is often conducted in terms of scholarly activity, and not every scholar has a particular interest in research for development, which is very different to research for just scholarly.
Exactly, yes. So, and I was very interested when I was doing my postdoc at the University of Waterloo. At the end of my postdoc, we all went to the study area and we had to disseminate the findings and the recommendations. So my professor, he came all the way. And each one of us, I think we were about 3 candidates, each one was able, we called all the stakeholders and we were able to disseminate our findings. So what is lacking in most research is knowledge translation. We just publish and keep it in our library. So that is difficult. Right. Even at the beginning of the research, involve all the stakeholders. You let them know. They may even come up with a problem which you can research on. So if it comes from them, it will be easier for them to implement it when you find the findings. So if research is just for scholarly, then we are missing it. And we'll never find the solutions we are looking for. So that was very key, Martina, for you brought it out. That is very true. There's most of the research that we are publishing, there's no knowledge translation. We don't go back to the grassroots and disseminate our findings and our recommendations. I think we need to change in this area.
And I think, sorry if I jump in, I think that we need to start asking the question, the question like directly when we do the research. How do you want this research to be fed back to you? I've asked this for the last 15 years. People are like, oh my God, I never got these questions. So people are like, so they're like frozen, But then after building a report, then they come back and they're like, we actually want a book for our civic class, in middle school. So I did that with my PhD research. We actually wanted to testify at the local government meeting. I can do that after I've done the research. I mean, there are so many different ways that we can translate the research like you're saying. But if we don't open up the communication with the community that we are researching in, then how are we possibly, I mean, like you're saying, we put it behind the paved walls and it just stays there. So
Yeah. I think, Martina, what in terms of good practice going forward, I think, because a lot of projects, they kind of like come and go, and I think principles of good practice, something that we tend to do often is ensure that there is like an end of project or something like that, workshop to disseminate to stakeholders. But I know that that's not practiced always because it requires additional budget. But that is certainly something that is, some scholars will do it, but the majority, I think, Martina, don't do it.
no, I think they don't. And then they say that they do participatory work because maybe, they do something else that is participatory. But I think there again, it is the responsibility of funders, like research funders, to actually tell us, you have to do it. There is the portion of the budget needs to go to this. And so then finally, also the ones that haven't done it yet will awake to the need of it. It is like this ethics review. We've started doing it in Sweden just in the last year. Before there was nothing like this. Now people are realizing it is actually important. So let us do the dissemination too.
Thank you very much. So we have seen the challenges, why our answers and our questions are not answered during research. Also the funders, maybe we should advise them as scholars to say there's this aspect of knowledge transfer that needs to be funded. We should not just end up data collection and analyzing and publishing. There should be that aspect should also be funded. So maybe we need to start informing them and letting them know that aspect also is very crucial when it comes to change. The whole essence of research is to bring change in society, to answer questions in society, not just in a scholarly article and we pack. So that is why we do research. Thank you very much. We're almost coming to the end. And the last question is, so how do we change this picture? We've seen the challenges that are there, how women are sidelined in the management of this resource, water, which is a natural resource. So what is the way forward? As we are winding up, I'll start with Professor.
So I think in terms of way forward, there's a couple of things I would like to say. There's taking ownership and responsibility and making sure that that is firmly anchored in terms of priority action plans. And to roll that out, I think having worked in this landscape is coordination and commitment. And I think the thing is, we're not coming into this thinking that we don't know enough. There's not enough research done. The players aren't out there. The people aren't out there. The organizations aren't there. The resources, the knowledge, the technical know-how, the capacity is there. And it's a very rich source of insight in every country. In terms of way forward, what is required is strong leadership to coordinate correctly a pathway and navigate a pathway over the short, medium and long term that's supported by a sustainable source of funding that will enable these the whole kind of like water access issue to be resolved. I mean, I don't work in a multinational company. This is not, to me, rocket science. This is just straightforward, I describe as project management and implementation, and it needs to be done in a manner that's gender sensitive and with the eyes of inclusivity rights at the heart of the programming.
Thank you. Last words, Dr. Martina.
Yeah, I was just adding on to what Tahseen was saying. I was thinking exactly about gender-sensitive adaptation as something that governments need to take full accountability for and move full on, because it is something where we have a lot of research where we've seen that specific adaptation projects are thought out to function, to work well, both for women and for men, and also for indigenous communities. We've seen improved adaptation and actually what we could call successful adaptation. So that's like a fundamental element. But then also taking a step further and move beyond just gender, and actually again looking at intersectionality, at the importance of different elements of identity, looking at the importance of indigenous knowledge, and understanding that indigenous knowledge is not something that is rooted in the past, but it is something that is actually evolving and that we can learn from, and that can come up with solutions that are way more appropriate and way more sustainable locally than many other top-down approaches. But yet again, to recognize this, the need for leadership and the need for funding is fundamental, because without that, nothing would happen.
Thank you. I'm sure we have seen that for this, for us to resolve issues of these water resources, which is a natural resource, we need a multi-sectoral approach. It's not only one sector to resolve this issue. It requires everyone on board to resolve all these issues for natural resource management, and especially the people that suffer most should be at the forefront in making policies and decisions for what affects them. And in this case, we're talking about women. Women should come on board. In developing countries like Zambia, where I am, in a rural area where I did that research, women are mostly sidelined because of traditional issues. Women are not supposed to come to talk in front of men. So those are the issues that affect some of our parts of the world, like in developing countries where we come from. A woman is supposed to be in the kitchen. A woman's place is in the kitchen. You're not supposed to be part and parcel of the decision-making process. So I think we need to find a way to bring on board all the traditional aspects so that they are aware of the importance of a woman. Okay? Because they are the ones that are affected most. When a child is sick, it's a woman that will take care of that child. When a man is sick, it's the woman who will take care of that child. So the women should be brought on board. They should be part and parcel in making decisions to whatever is affecting them in the natural resource management. If they are brought on board, I'm sure our research has already shown us that a lot will be achieved if you bring women on board. So thank you very much, panelists, for this discussion, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this fascinating discussion. And we do have a couple of questions that have been put in the Q&A box that I'd love to get the three of your perspectives on. Just in the final moments here, we have a long question, and so I'll just summarize here a question about climate change and the effect on Africa versus the global north and elsewhere, that we often think of it as being something that's affecting the North American or global north countries. And so the question is, how can we help those exposing body in a spatial way? Or basically, how can we help those folks in Africa? And will climate change affect African populations? Regardless of what we think, climate change has already been affecting our continent. A typical example is the drought, which is currently happening in Somalia and Borneo, part of my country, Ethiopia. Typical example of flooding in Malawi is other climate change crisis. Are you able to reflect on, perhaps the challenges in the global north and global south? I know this was something that we mentioned as well in moving forward with respect to climate change. Perhaps you, Inonge, first.
Thank you very much. I think for Africa, yes, Africa still needs a lot of help. The challenge we have in Africa is resources to manage this challenge of climate change. You've seen what is happening in Malawi. The country is devastated. So the main challenge is resources. We need a lot of help from developing countries to try and help us in managing these resources. Of course, there are a lot of sensitization programs that are coming on board. We are told to make sure that we plant trees around. We also have an impact of this, but the argument that is there is a lot of these climate change issues are brought in by developing countries. How do we come in now? But the fact is that everyone is affected by the effect of climate change, like we are seeing in Malawi. Many people have died. Many people have been left homeless. So climate change issue is everyone's issue. That's why I said we need a multi-sectoral approach. Whether you are from a developed country or a developing country, you may come in a small way you can manage. Like, for example, in Africa, there's a sensitization of maybe planting trees to try and restore the natural resource. There's a lot of deforestation because of access to energy. So what is coming out most is what we can even help, maybe to plant trees, but we need a lot of help from developing countries. in trying to resolve all these issues, the impact of climate change. Okay, we can mitigate and adapt, but we still need a lot of help from our colleagues from developed countries. Maybe I can end here for now.
Tahseen and Martina, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'll just give a quick comment because I know we're running out of time. I mean, it's a huge question. But just picking up from what Inonge was saying, in terms of how can we help folks, this is a question about bringing down our carbon emissions in the global north. This is about mitigation and trying to do whatever we can to reduce our carbon footprint and keep global warming to within 1.5. That's all. I know that we're already way off target for that. But in terms of citizens in the global north, is thinking about how we live, what we do, how we commute, how we heat our homes. I mean, and they're not just simple things that we can adjust to ourselves because it requires national coordination and funding to support that. But in terms of how we help those countries such as the Horn of Africa, those in Malawi and so on, this is all about finance. And we do whatever it is we can to try and articulate our voices for the need to get finance to those countries that need it the most, to help them not just adapt to their changing environment, but to build resilience and to support well-being of individuals and societies and communities as a whole. Because coping with a changing environment and extreme weather events is extremely hard. And one of the things that we are doing is implementing, as of last year, a program of work to help deal with the impacts of climate change on women's mental health and well-being, which is another story to tell on another day.
And Martina, do you want to comment on this question?
I think we are in the presence of major cognitive dissonance, where both we as single individuals living in the global north and our governments think that what is happening in the global south is far away from us and that climate change is happening elsewhere. This is actually not the case. The climate change is also happening here, and we're actually seeing some changes in terms of leadership, policy making, funding, finally happening in countries in the global north where the impacts of climate change have become very apparent. So in a way, the answer, yes, is financing. The answer is leadership, but the answer is also recognizing that it's not just happening elsewhere, that the funding doesn't just go elsewhere, but that the funding actually is needed for all of us to get through this together. And we do absolutely need to start doing our part first in the global north by cutting emissions. So that's the number one thing, because adaptation would just not save us. Like 1.5 is just there facing us.
Thank you. It's unfortunate that we're running out of time here, as we have a number of other questions, but I think the one that I will ask you to just close on is, how can young girls be involved early on in these matters of water resources? Is it in schools? Is there another way? And perhaps we can end on that hopeful note of how can the next generation become involved in solving these things. So maybe I'll start with you, Martina, and go around my screen here.
I think representation is power. And I can bring in an example from my fieldwork in East Africa. I did research in a community in Kenya where it is a cultural taboo for women to work with irrigation because they are believed to be dirty due to their menstruations. So women could never participate in any decision making around water, could not sit in the water forums that they had in that community until the county irrigation person became a woman. And then men had to accept a woman in that group because it was the government putting it on to them. And actually, that's when girls started questioning, okay, I can actually be in that group too, right? So I guess my point is that we all as women that are now in different position of leadership, across government, university, and so on and so forth. And we need actually to take the time to sit in those forums where we can be seen by the younger women that want to get engaged in these topics and realize that these are actually arenas where they can and should be involved, because we're still the minority.
Thank you. And Tahseen?
Yeah, I'll just say very quickly, knowledge is power. And one of the things that we've done to encourage young people to be involved in climate conversations is through climate schools and starting education and creating awareness at young age, at primary school age, is really important. And in fact, the work that we did on water in Malawi and Zambia, we worked together with primary schools in some of the most difficult parts in Glasgow here, and connected our school children with school children in Malawi and Zambia. So it raised awareness and educated at the same time. And the children at the end of the show put pledges on a tree. And if I could just show you, if I could just turn to that, if you can see that, they're pledges that are put on that tree that we created, and they were hung up by primary school children to show their commitment to tackling climate change.
Very nice, very nice. Great to see that. So, and Inonge will give you the last word.
Yes, I think it can start from the policies. Policies, let policies explain or bring out the issues of involving the girls especially. And this brings that to curriculum in schools. Also should make sure that there's environmental education where the children, as the girls as young as nursery or preschool, they have this knowledge of environmental issues, how to take care of these natural resources. So if the knowledge starts from the school, and the children, they respect the teachers very much as compared to parents. So if it comes from the school, if you have this curriculum in schools, emphasize a lot in managing resources and how women, girls can be involved in managing this resource, which is water. That one will be, I think it will be a plus. And also in communities, there should be a lot of advocacy on the management of these natural resources. To the girls, why girls should be participating actively in managing of these resources. So we need advocacy. We need the curriculum to be open to talk about these issues, especially involving girls. Okay, so when they grow like that, they will become responsible women when they're adults, so they know how to manage the natural resource. So it all starts with education, as Professor has said. The education should come open on the issues of managing the resources. In this case, we're talking about the water resources. So education, the curriculum should focus on the girls and women on natural resource management. And also in communities, advocates for those that have no access to go to formal schools. There should be a lot of advocacy, environmental education in schools, as well as in communities. And that's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful event, and I thank you for showing up and taking your time to be visible and to share your knowledge with people watching today, and of course those that will watch online after. Also, those people who have attended and asked questions, it's really wonderful to have this level of engagement. The next Women Plus Water event will be on April 20th, 2023, on the topic of civil society action for sustainable water futures, where we'll be picking up on this theme of what we can collectively do to move water forward with Dr. Louise Arnall and guests Anita Collins from the Tree Women's Council and Mikasa Looking Horse from Oregano's Let's Talk Water podcast and McMaster University. If you wish to register, you can do so at www.womenpluswater.org. You can also register there to become an expert on the Women Plus Water expert list and look forward to other opportunities to engage in action through that initiative. We will just be ending this formal webinar now.